Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear? Awesome. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. I'm really excited for us to discuss When They See Us. And we do have a special guest tonight who is on with us. So I'm going to go ahead and do her introduction so we can go ahead and get her on and gain access to her. But joining us tonight is Dr. Kira Rogers. Her professional experience extends across 13 years in government and 8 years in higher education and academia. She currently serves as the director of Macon University's Criminal Justice Department. She's also the instructor of criminal justice there. She's the director of the Teen Justice Diversion Program, the program manager for Adult Redeploy Illinois, the Sixth Circuit Family Violence Coordinating Council coordinator, a board member for the Juvenile Justice Initiative, that's a statewide policy agency. She's the founder of the Restorative Justice Global Partnership, which includes Hawaii, Chicago, Decatur, Illinois, Washington, D.C., New York, Italy, London, and Nepal, and an independent consultant for grant writing and restorative justice training. Her research interests include public administration, public policy, criminal justice issues, reentry, social justice, expungement, diversion, restorative justice, probation, and community-based program development in the United States and around the world. So without further ado, let's go ahead and invite Dr. Rogers to join us. Thanks, Dr. Rogers, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, thank you. Appreciate the invitation. Thank you for the bio as well. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Can you all see me? Is it good? All right, excellent. Again, thanks for having me on tonight. And I am actually pretty excited to hear from you about what you thought about Now They See Us, right? I'm curious. And so in particular, we have a lot going on in juvenile justice. Or I'm sorry, when they see us. What did I say? Now they see us. So anyway, we have a lot going on in juvenile justice. There's been a lot of paradigm shifts happening. It's been a very busy summer. And normally professors get the summer off, right? No, there's no such thing ever. So there's never summer off. But in terms of policy, in terms of direction that we are actually moving, I'll give you just an example of what's happened in Chicago since the end of May. And so here we are at the end of July. So it has been about a good 2 months. So you might have heard, in Chicago, they have different kinds of, juvenile diversion programs up there too. They have, a precinct on every corner just about in law enforcement. And they had something called the JISC program, J-I-S-C. It stands for Juvenile Intervention Support Center, I think, maybe. Anyhow, they found out that this program that had actually been running for about 14 years has yielded, little to no results for anything good. And we also found out that, for Illinois in particular, mostly city of Chicago, they've wasted $20 million a year, on this type of this program. So now they're looking to figure out what comes next. What do we do? Do we just pull the rug out from, under the kids who are going through this program? Or do we try to develop something while they're going through the program, but at the same time, we're not going to pay for this because it's been ridiculous. So what do we do? And so after attending city council meetings, as well as the statewide, restorative justice meetings, they also have a citywide restorative justice meeting in Chicago, which I get invited to these things a lot because I do spend a lot of time in Chicago. And what we have learned is that there is still much work to be done as we are starting to just now listen to what it is that young people have been saying all along about these types of programs, right? And I'll give you a little bit of insight too, in terms of what I wrote about in my own dissertation. What we have done in the criminal justice system over the years, decades. We did things to make ourselves feel good. And I say we because I used to be part of that regime before I turned over a new leaf, if you will. I'll get to that in a second. So I started out in prosecution. To me, that's all I knew. That's where I came from. That is where I was raised, prosecution. And I started out in 2007 working for Teen Court, right? And anybody familiar with that former name, the teen court program? Yeah, some of you are shaking your heads. And then I also, was a truant officer. And so everything was very punitive. Like everything was very, you're either going to do what we tell you or else, that type of thing, right? But then when I actually took over as administrator in 2013 in government, my predecessor had basically said, hey, you're the one for this, you're going to take over, we're going to do what we need to do. Okay, great. So when I took over in 2013, I started conducting my own experiments, and I wanted to know how we could increase the program and get more young people involved, that kind of stuff. And I remember going to a school and setting up. We went to many schools, but I went to 2 different schools that particular day. I went to Eisenhower High School and I went to Mount Zion High School. And let me tell you what I experienced. We used to have the big pretty booth with, the handouts and the flyers and the bowl of candy, the necessary works to get a kid to come to the table, right? However, I noticed that even when kids came to the table and they saw this Macon County teen court on the back of our, on the back of our table, on the big trifold, some of them looked at it and walked away. And I was curious now. I'm like, wait a minute, you're not in trouble, so why are you walking away from this table? So then I did the same thing at the other school, Mount Zion. Even them, they were like, yep, nope, I'm like, now what is this about? So I just said, you know what, day number 2, I went and sat at the lunch table with the kids. I wanted to know what it is that got them to turn around from this table. And it didn't matter what school, right? They both did it. So I'm like, okay. So I sat down at the table at Eisenhower, just went to a random lunch table. These kids are like, who is this sitting at our table? Right? And I asked them, I said, when you guys saw that poster over there, what were you thinking about? Why did you walk away from the table? And the young people told me, they said, that says court. That ain't for us. I said, oh, okay. All right. And I went to Mount Zion, did the same thing. And I said, what made you walk away from that table? And they said, we don't want to be cops. I was like, oh, okay, gotcha. Because you see the word court, that's what you're thinking. All right. So I then went back to the teen court and I asked them, is this what we are? Is this what we do? And the young people said, yeah. I said, okay. So how do we change this? Because this isn't what we're supposed to be. They said, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, this isn't how I envision this. And so they decided to change the name to Teen Justice. So they actually started this trend. It wasn't me. But to kind of fill you in, in 2012, I went to a conference where we got a chance to meet with a young man who was very much in the situation like the exonerated 5 that we're going to talk about a little later on. And this young man is the one who changed my entire outlook on the criminal justice system. We're about the same age, I think. But anyway, his name is Xavier McElrath-Bay. And some of you might know him, some of you don't, but he's a senior policy analyst now. And he spent time in prison. And I'll tell you his story just a little bit. And this sort of breaks the ice for getting into conversations about, when they see us. And so again, sitting at a table full of prosecutors at this particular conference in Springfield, governor was there, everybody. And what ended up happening was he told his story about when he was 11 years old and how he was actually sentenced to prison for murder at 11. And he talked about how growing up in the streets of Chicago, some of the rough parts of Chicago, he talked about how in order to even walk to school, you need to have protection, and all the kids knew where to go. If you were with this certain group of people, you know where to go to get the gun on your way to school. And one day he and his friend were playing with the gun and it was loaded and it shot his friend in the head and his friend died. So imagine the trauma, of a young person at the age of 11 that just witnessed your best friend being killed, from just playing with the gun. So then he talked about how they were investigating this particular crime and the officers show up at the school. And this is the part that changed everything for me. He talked about how the officers called the teachers, allowed the officers to come in and talk to him, right? First of all, red flag right there. Then the officers pulled out 2 guns and they wanted to ask him, they said, is this your gun? One of them, was a big gun with a silencer on it. The other one was a small little, a 9 Glock. And they said, we know that, the gun has been involved in a recent murder. Is this gun yours? one of these two, are these yours? He said, no, my gun is in my backpack hanging up over there on the wall. So it's how they got him. And again, this was allowed to happen back then. Policies did not exist back then like they do now. And so he talked about what it was like to be arrested and handcuffed and beaten by the officers, and nothing anybody can do about it. And even if he said it, no one believed him. He mentioned what it was like to be locked up in prison, where you're dehumanized, where you're treated like the lowest of the earth. And like you're not even you're just dehumanized. You're not even human. So it's these kinds of instances that he was talking about. And I'm sparing you a lot of details for the sake of time as well. But I remember sitting in that conference and my heart broke. My spirit broke. I had tears running, and my colleagues are looking at me like, what is wrong with you? Like, I can't believe they didn't feel it, but I did. And I talked to him after that conference was over, and 2011 or 2012, it was one of those 2 years. And this was basically where I had to know. I told him, how did you hold on to your sanity after everything you just described in this conference? He said it wasn't easy to do because he too had been shot in the face. And he talked about, recovering from an injury like that. And he also talked about how, there were some people that really aided him in that he was able to get education while he was in prison. He became, very familiar with how policy issues were affecting, Black and brown people all over Illinois. And he then started to do a lot of campaigning about this, although no one would listen at first because he had a record, right? And it's a murder. And so he talked about how, there were all these barriers that existed, and it didn't stop him. So now, he's doing very well. He's doing policy changes all over the world, actually. And you get a chance to hear some of the stories that he tells. If you go online, you can YouTube some of the videos and everything too. But I know I use them as talking pieces in my classes, because when you hear a story like that, you then get a chance to realize and recognize a lot more about what it means to be human. And you get a chance to honestly understand that the system was never set up to help anyone. And again, as a product of prosecution is what I like to call it, we were taught coming right out of school, right out of college, that whatever looks like a criminal is, and I don't even know what that means, but that's basically what we were taught. If it moves, if it quacks, if, all these things, if it sounds like a duck, Xavier McElrath Bay. And if it quacks, like a duck, waddles like a duck, it must be a duck, that kind of thing. You guys get that, right? So that's what we were taught in law enforcement back then. So, and I remembered these things because another instance that happened is that when I was a junior in college, in undergrad, I actually went to court with my professor, who was a prosecutor in Sangamon County. She's retired now. And the very first case I actually got a chance to go and see was, and this is my first time in court, so I'm excited. Everything was just like TV, right? It was everything to me. And the very first case was about a 2-year-old child who had been sexually penetrated by her biological father, and all of the things that he did to her to expand certain areas just so he could penetrate. The judge had to address me, and during one of the breaks, and he said, "Miss Rogers, are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine, totally fine." He goes, "No, Miss Rogers, are you okay?" And I'm like, "I am fine." And then I said, "Judge, no, I'm fine." And really, when I did that, I felt the front part of my legs. I didn't realize I had been crying in court. I didn't even know it. Does it ever happen to you? You cry and don't know that you're crying? You can't even feel the tears coming down your face because you're so numb right then. After hearing all those details that this man did to his daughter, by the way, she still has to get reconstructive surgeries to this day. And to try to see, what it's like for a young person to have a normal life after going through something like that, right? I was angry. So that's what made me want to go into prosecution. And then when I got there, in a way, you see that prosecution, they're almost taking their frustrations and their angers out on whatever case comes across their desk. It's not about caring whether or not that person is a human at that moment. And also too, you might have noticed in the actual film that you guys watched, the role of the prosecutor, she did her job. She did. That's what she was supposed to do. Not ethical, but she did it. Right? We're going to break that down in a second too. So in particular, just to kind of paint the picture for you, again, I came from the prosecution side of things. And only after meeting people face to face in teen court, then turned it to teen justice, then changed the program philosophy. I broke that whole program down and got rid of it. I couldn't do it anymore. After hearing what Xavier was talking about, after talking to people face to face in my office, understanding the different barriers that they were going through, understanding that some people have 2 or 3 barriers, others have been experiencing barriers since they set foot on earth. Those are the kinds of things that made me change what it is that we were doing. I couldn't do it anymore. And I actually went to my bosses and I told them, I'm either going to be your employee today or I'm not, but I can't do this. And they said, well, fix what you need to fix. Okay, that's all I needed to hear. So again, broke the program down, reconstructed the whole thing. And only a few people have seen it. And so many have read about it now. And this model is actually going to be duplicated in the whole 6th Circuit because the request is already out. And so the 6th Circuit includes Macon, Piatt, Champaign, DeWitt, Douglas, and Moultrie counties. And then once we expand to the 6th Circuit, I'm going to go to the other circuits. The point of the matter is this has to happen. And so in terms of diversion and understanding what it is that kids actually go through, I even learned that the way teen court was set up before was not true diversion. I had to go all the way to London to figure that out. And it was like, okay, now if we go to London and we're actually learning what they're doing across the water, right? I got a chance to go to one of the schools over in London. And do you know, these kids figured it out. They're from 22 different countries. They speak all different languages. Yet any kind of conflict that existed, these kids were able to actually create a restorative circle right then and there before us. They took a rock, a shoe, a stick. It didn't matter. They were able to have those conversations and they resolved the conflict. The teachers were there. They stood by, but they did nothing. They were not supposed to intervene. The kids were supposed to figure it out first. And when they did, that's when the teachers gave them positive reinforcement. I'm like, really? Why can't we figure this out in the States? Right? And so it was a lot of transformation that's happened in my time of working with criminal justice and in policy, and started working on a lot of law changes and policy changes. Some of the, it was driving me nuts as I was watching, When They See Us, because I'm like, this is the time before forensics, this is became what it is. This is the time before policies became what they are. And we still have a lot of work to do in policy reform, a lot of work to do. And sometimes we cannot do that without hearing from people like yourselves. That's true. And a lot of people feel that way. Absolutely. I'm reading the chats as we go through. So if you don't have your chat box turned on, feel free to do that. Yes. So there's been a lot of changes so far, but we are nowhere near where we need to be. And some of the movements and things that you see now, they might start out as hashtags, but they mean a lot more than that. And then you also have the instances where, a lot of the messages are misconstrued because people don't understand the real meaning behind some of these hashtags and movements. So having a chance to actually spend time with a group like yours tonight, and honestly, on a personal level, it means a lot to me. Personally, it really does. In that you're curious about these things. You've had this group to be able to talk about these things. That means when it's time to actually enact a lot of this policy that we're proposing, that means that you're more likely to vote for it because this is what you've been talking about all along. And finally, someone speaks English, speaks your language. This is what you wanted. So that's the reason why I'm glad to have this meeting tonight. And I want to open this up to sort of ask, what were some of your initial thoughts when you were watching When They See Us? Just some of the initial thoughts. Anybody, feel free to jump in. You can type it, you can say it, either way.
I was furious. I hadn't heard about their story, and I was floored at how they were treated and just the way, I know it was a dramatization, but it's just the way that the detectives, isolated them. And I couldn't imagine my own children in that sort of situation. I was just angry.
Yeah. I know, right? It's deep. That's very deep. Anyone else? Because we're gonna come back to your comments, Amanda. Anyone else?
I just kept thinking about how they jailed Corey with grown men at 16. And, you know, I'm an educator, and so whenever we study child development, you study the brain doesn't fully mature until about 25, especially for men. So to even be putting 18-year-olds in that situation, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, their brains haven't fully developed to the point where they're making good choices for themselves on a daily basis, let alone whenever they're put into a situation like that. And it just really, really bothered me to put a 16-year-old kid. I mean, they were all kids, but Corey's story just ripped me apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his story wrecked me as well.
Got it. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. One of the things that I'll say, I'm probably a little old, and I lived in Chicago all my life, and I know of real stories. And what it did, it just brought a lot of pain, and tears crowd all the way through the whole thing, because I know that too often, regularly, that was not, and that was horrific. But in Chicago, under the guidance of John Burge back in the day, that infamous, you know, captain, that it was known how they would beat confessions out of people, black and brown people, on a regular basis. It brought back a lot of tears, and with them being so young and understanding what is happening and why there's so much hatred later, you just cannot erase. We're not as fortunate as John Lewis, who can say, I don't hate, I can forgive, but there's many who cannot forgive. And it's there. And it festers from the person that had been incarcerated wrongly, beat wrongly, to the families surrounding those people. It's like that ripple effect of a pebble in the water pond. A lot of people wind up having hatred and distrust for years after it. That's all I got.
I was going to say that what struck me was how not just the children were manipulated, questioned without any legal representation, sometimes questioned without their parents, but that when their parents came, the parents were manipulated as well. And that the parents were pushed into a situation that they didn't demand legal representation. And really, I don't know, I'm a child of two attorneys, and the kids should, nothing the children should have said. They were children under the law. They shouldn't have been able to speak to a detective. It just seems so wrong. They didn't know what they were doing, how they, I mean, some of them believed that by doing this, they were going to get out of it, and they didn't realize they were digging themselves a deep hole. And then the parents just wanted to get the kids home, and it really was a manipulation. And of course, a terrible miscarriage of justice also, because the real rapist was still out there. The other thing that I was struck by, and I had some vague memories, I was a senior in college when this incident happened, was the language that was used and how very similar it is to language that has been used. We read previously The Blood of Emmett Till, and the terminology, and part of this I'm taking also from a PBS documentary I watched last night, but it was also included in the 4-part miniseries, was using words like they're animals, they were wilding. They really didn't make them into children, right? They were described as that helped dehumanize them and push the narrative that they were guilty.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Everything, can everybody still hear me? Am I frozen or, okay, good. So you bring up, all of you, thank you for your comments. You bring up some very, very good points and some excellent talking points too that we can actually dive into. I don't mean to go into teaching mode, but I kind of can't help it. So here we are. So the first thing I wanted to sort of make sure that I mentioned the context in terms of time frame. Remember, this was back in the 80s, 89. And also to let you know, I was 4 years old, so there you go, right? So it was 89. And a lot of laws back then are not what they are now. They just were not. Those laws did not exist. They had not been modified. The system had been set up to do exactly what it was supposed to do. Also, at that same time, in terms of time frame, remember were we in the Clinton administration at that time? I think we were, right? I should know history. But anyway,
No, we weren't.
Who was before? It was Bush?
Bush.
It was
And it was during a time when there was a lot of crackdown on
the Get Tough
violent
on
crime in New York. I mean, there was a whole narrative around violent crime in New York that was going on.
Yeah, New York and Los Angeles. And then when the Clinton administration took over, what word did Hillary Clinton use to call kids of color back then? That she had to apologize for when she was running for office a couple years ago. Does anybody remember? Thank you, Janelle. Thank you. Super predators. She sure did. That is the actual context in which the country was used to when describing young kids who were wilding. So yes, the super predators, again, she had to apologize for this, obviously for obvious reasons, but if you actually replay some of those sound bites and the clips from when Clinton was talking about this, they were really making reference to the New York and Los Angeles. This was the time frame where the crack cocaine and the drugs and the guns and prostitution was really being publicized, and it was a lot of young kids that were doing a lot of these things. And this is the time frame that Clinton said these monsters, these super predators, could not be rehabilitated. She said things like that. And that was the agenda that our country was used to at that time. So that was, in terms of history, this is where we really had to get tough on crime. That's the era that we were in at that time. We didn't move into get smart on crime until around the early, 2000s, which is where we came with these teen court programs, which came in 2004. Does that make sense? We are still suffering the symptoms of some of those things. Until 1993. Thank you, Jamie. And so that's about where we were in terms of mindset. Our systems were set up like that as well. So in terms of brain development, I forget who mentioned that comment, but just so that you're aware, the criminal justice system didn't care about brain development back then. We only really started paying attention about 7 years ago. Sad, isn't it? And the truth about that reality is that there were a lot of theories in criminal justice about why people commit crime and why they don't. What prevents people from committing crime, what makes them commit more, right? Lots of theories going on out there. And the way to really test a lot of these theories is to do a lot of, absolutely, you're right, Dorothy, to do a lot of experimentation in, different programs and things like that. However, even the practitioners had a lot to learn, right? So somebody else talked about the treatment that the officers actually used when handling the kids, right? All of them. Were you aware of the courtroom 302 in Chicago? Oh, okay. Courtroom 302 is interesting in that this is the same type of thing that happened. The judge used to pay officers to, the officers got paid to do what they did. And actually, I think the judge got paid. No, I'm sorry, the judge got paid to, basically slam the hammer down on Black and brown kids in that area. Courtroom 302 is what that is called. Room 302, there you go. And when you search more about this, and now that could be a book study too, but when you search more about this, you will see that there were many people that were put in jail, some were put on death row, all these kinds of things. Because remember, the death penalty existed back then. And yes. And so you can actually see, in terms of how corrupt a court system can be, people were coerced in their statements. In order to get out of these situations, what did they do? They actually said, yeah, I'm the one who did it. Can you let me go now? And they had nothing to do with it. So the same thing you saw in the Exonerated Five and what was going on with them. I just want to go home. I just want to go home. They're beating me. They're holding me for hours. They're not feeding me. I haven't had anything to drink. I have not been able to talk to one. I have not been read my Miranda rights. I have not been, asked if I wanted an attorney. Nothing. And these are kids. And if you think about this today now, and I'll just challenge some of you as well. If you were pulled over today, would you know your rights in terms of what you can and cannot say, what you can and cannot do? And we are adults, right? How much more then do the kids know? Just to put that in perspective. There used to be a couple of handouts going around. This actually came, I think, from the Innocence Project. They were doing this, but there were a couple of handouts that used to be given out informing people of their rights, what you can and cannot do, or what you should or should not do when law enforcement is pulling people over or even addressing people. So there's a lot. Yes, exactly. There's a lot that could be found in Courtroom 302 that is very, very similar to what happened to the exonerated 5. Again, in this case, Courtroom 302, though, the judge, I think, had been paid. Sure. And then also, too, the officers, they got the feather in their cap for the fact that they got these people off the street, although they were innocent people in most cases, but they got the people off the street. So it was, and you saw the same thing in the exonerated 5, right? But in their case, but it's just that there was clout that was given to those who did their jobs. And that's honestly what the prosecutor was going for. That's what the officers, were enjoying about their particular jobs. And so that's right. And so there's a lot that, that was not always known to the public until people started asking questions. And a lot of those questions were started by people who had been experiencing those things. So another thing, you talked about the families, how the families were affected. This blows my mind in that, even now, we can't really imagine, what it was like to have to police the police. Our hashtags are helping us do this now. But what do you think the original Black Panthers were doing? What did we do in America? We criminalized the Black Panthers. Our system did. The system told us they were criminals, and that's what we grew up believing. But they were not. They actually would police the police because they were tired of their own people being killed on the way home from work by law enforcement. Sound familiar? Yeah, the same stuff we're seeing now. I've actually spent time with some of the people. That's right. I've actually spent time with some of the original Black Panthers, and honestly, it was an honor to meet them. And even their descendants and all the public policy work that they're doing now, just to hear the things that they had to experience, it blew my mind as well. And one thing I was super proud of Disney for doing this. Anybody seen the Black Panther movie? Yeah? I'm hoping you have. Okay, well, if you haven't seen it, it's a great movie. Feel free to watch. My uncle's in it. And my best friend is too. She's one of the Dora Milaje. And so the thing is, what I really enjoyed about, and I was proud of this moment, I think Disney took a chance at it and they did it well. In that, did you see the setting at the very beginning of the movie? It was in Oakland. That's the home of the original Black Panthers. And I was like, oh, I see you, Disney. Okay. So they had my support from that point. So anyways, just kind of knowing some history, right? And the fact that they were actually to bring that to light, it was sort of the start of a whole new conversation that we were able to have in some of our classes at Millikan. It was great. But again, understanding the history and the progression of where we've come from. And we have a lot, like I said, a lot more work to do. But in terms of the families, this is, again, what some of the Black Panthers were talking about, in that families did not actually know their rights either. And so whenever their kids were in custody, they did what the officers told them to do because they did not know, nor did they feel empowered to say anything contrary to what the officers were telling them, right? They said, if you want your kid to go home tonight, like you guys saw in the movie, right? You want your kid to go home tonight, then you need to talk to them. You need to tell them this is what happened. You need to tell them blah, 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 right? So that's what they did. And only to find out they actually could not go home. They didn't take their kids home, and if they did, they were taken right back to jail. So there were all kinds of things that happened, especially, they were detailed in Courtroom 302, all kinds of things that happened to people while they were in custody. Another instance that, that we're probably more familiar with today is the Sandra Bland case. Is anybody familiar with Sandra Bland? one of the, are we frozen? Okay, no, we're not frozen. So, and I've met Sandra Bland's sister in Champaign, Illinois. Actually, they had a conference over there where she came and she was a speaker. And just to hear, you know, the things that Sandra used to talk about, she had a lot of video clips from Sandra's social media profiles, and just to kind of hear, you know, what the family had to go through, and that there's this, all of a sudden, this huge gap in time, and that nobody could explain what happened to Sandra when she was behind bars. Nothing. Like, that's just unheard of. And so, you know, it's to the families and the deep, you know, impact that they feel, the trauma that they go through when their loved ones are incarcerated as well. It really started something with the Illinois Supreme Court. And the Illinois Supreme Court in December of last year, they said that they would like to put together these different task force, and this one force in particular was looking at money bond. And is anybody familiar with money bond? There's the Coalition to End Money Bond. Okay, I see some yeses and nos. Okay, so in long story short, the Coalition to End Money Bond, I did not realize it's 6:38, sorry, I talk a lot, but the Coalition to End Money Bond, I'm used to teaching 4-hour classes, so this is normal, you know, so yes, same thing as cash bond. They actually had some people to get together and talk about this, right? So whenever people are arrested, there's a bail that, you know, that can be posted. Well, the truth of the matter is a lot of people do not have the money to post bail. They talked about that a little bit in the movie as well, right? The 4-part movie. And so the Coalition to End Money Bond is actually bringing to light the fact that the people who have money, they're the ones who get out of jail. The ones who don't have money, they're stuck, and they lose their houses, they lose their kids, they lose their cars, they lose their jobs, and then the cycle continues. And so it is just, they were talking about these multiple cycles that have happened, and again, coupled with other barriers that may have already existed. So, so there's a lot that, again, the Coalition to End Money Bond is bringing to light. So those are just some of the initial things that you guys have talked about, and the long-term effects, oh yeah, they're deep. Did you hear what Antron said? Did anybody watch the 4th part? Well, actually, no, 5th part. It was with Oprah when she interviewed them. Yeah. So one of the things that Antron talked about, he was real with his thoughts and feelings. He still hates his father, right? Still hates him, won't talk to him. That was the hardest to watch, I agree. And the fact that he talked about, he said, I'm messed up. Like, you know, he was being real about it. And and the truth of the matter is African-American people don't always think counseling works. A lot of people don't. It ain't just us, all right? A lot of people don't think that it works, but some people are afraid of the stigma of it. But it's okay to need help. It's okay to admit that you need help. But in his situation, right, it's easy for us to say that to each other face to face. But for someone who's been through what he's been through, and I think Corey said it best, you don't give a F about me, you know? So let's be real. I mean, this is what people experience day in and day out when you have a system that's been constantly, you know, badgering them, dehumanizing them, and then you say, go to counseling. It just doesn't add up. So, I mean, there's a lot of long-term effects that they had, and, you know, the fact that they felt that people were going to hate them no matter where they went. The whole world hated them. You know, the correctional officers, how they actually, you know, allowed the other inmates to rape and beat them. You know, that part wasn't in the documentary, but Corey talked about it. The lasting effects that it has on a person. You know, it's hard to look someone in the face. And even me, although I'm an advocate for policy change and changing our criminal justice system from the inside out, like, although I am an advocate for this, I'm not even sure that I would know how to talk to Corey. I don't know. What could I possibly say to him? I'm sorry, it doesn't cut it. I feel your pain, or I understand, doesn't cut it. You know? So there's a lot that went on in the case back in the 80s, which makes me so appreciative of where forensic science is actually headed. That's a course that I teach at Millikan. I teach that one alongside biology, and we teach our students to really understand what kind of evidence we're looking at. And that is one thing I have to say. Like, when I was actually watching this, you know, the 4-part film, I was like, the forensics, oh my God, check the forensics. And they just didn't, because it did not exist like that back then. We just did not have that kind of, you know, access to forensic evidence. And even when you got it, it was not the best. So now things are different, but that's something the students learn in my class starting day 2. you know, and in forensics, we are really getting to the nitty gritty of it. We're teaching them how to understand, you know, and that's one of the first things I thought about in a rape case, you know, where was the actual, how was the profile of the rapist developed? You know, where was the DNA? Was the DNA linked to anyone? And the fact that this prosecutor did not, like, it's like people were afraid to stand up to her or something. But, you know, the one lady said that, you know, this evidence isn't linking up to the kids. It's not making sense. The timeframes weren't there. But the prosecutor's job, just so that you're aware, whenever they're in a courtroom, the prosecutor's job is just to kind of tell the story, right? And to sway the jury's opinion one way or another, which is why they will face the jury. They will actually, you know, body language is everything, showing absolute confidence whenever they are telling this narrative of what happened in the courtroom. When juveniles are arrested in Macon County, they're either taken home or they are actually taken to Peoria, because we do not have a detention center here. They used to have one. There were all kinds of unethical things that happened. It's what I was told. I wouldn't know. I wasn't there. But then they don't have a detention center here anymore. But also, too, as the Juvenile Justice Commission for Illinois is actually pushing to shut them down anyway. So detention centers, you know, there's just even prisons, they're looking to shut a lot of those down. It is a long way from their families, and their families do not go and visit. So that's something too. You heard in the movie, come visit me more. What did Corey say to his mom? Come visit me more. Why? Because they're holding on to as much sanity as they can, and it's on thin ice as it is, right? So there are a lot of conversations that happen, you know, in these situations, and it's again, it's not an easy topic. It's not, especially when you get a chance to sit down face to face with someone to understand their hurt, their pain, their barriers. Yeah, the phone calls are expensive. And then you also get a chance to hear their truth and hear what it is they've been thinking and processing. And then you realize just how privileged we really are on the outside of those bars, right? One of the things that Xavier talked about, actually, I'm friends with him on Facebook too, but one of the things that I heard him talk about was the trauma that is lasting trauma. He actually posted a video of when he was riding on a bus, just riding on a bus in the city, going from one location to the next. And there was as the bus was moving, the image that he posted was just a tiny, small video clip of the side of the bus where it was like the jail, you know, the bus that's taking you to jail. It's just seeing that part of the bus instantly reminded him of that. And he posted that video clip and talked about it. You know, in another instance, he talked about, you know, what it was like when they had the press conference inside of right outside the youth detention center in Chicago. And you heard the kids beating on the walls inside the building. And they had the press conference right outside. So that was, I think, one of the names of somebody's book title, Beating on the Walls or something like that. But anyway, they were just talking about what it means to feel like a caged animal and that you have no rights anymore. And even when you get out, you saw how difficult it was for the men as they were trying to turn over a new leaf and do the right thing. And it was much easier for, who was it, the gentleman that actually ended up selling crack, right? He was just trying to, and again, this was something that, this is why I focus on reentry a lot. In that when you release people from prison, the system's job is done. But what do we do to welcome them back home? It's like taking somebody from war, same thing. You know, they've been in war and they're coming home now. What reentry do we have for them? The PTSD is real, you know, from both situations. The PTSD is real, but yet you want to take them and put them in a room with a little 4 or 5-year-old. What are they supposed to do with this kid right now? You want to tell them they have a curfew to be home by 9 o'clock? How am I supposed to go to work? What if I have a night shift? Right? And I can't be in parks anymore? Well, that's my way to work. What do I do? So there were a lot of barriers that they talked about in the movie, and I really thought they did it well. And those are just a few of them. They didn't get into trying to get, you know, some kind of assistance from government. They didn't even touch on that. Right? So let me open the floor. How are settlements determined? If you're talking about the New York case and how they actually got the $40 million, that particular case, I think the charges, there was like, you know, what was it called again? Oh gosh, now it's escaping me. Now that we're thinking about it, it's escaping me. But anyway, it's the long-term effect that it has on a person. And that was part of the settlement. Also, you know, the way in which the courts handled everything, and the fact that the officers coerced their statements, which again, courtroom 302 all over that. The fact that, you know, the prosecutor pieced these things together in a very unethical way. She was not disbarred, which was one thing that really irritated me. I didn't care about her losing her sponsors, whatever, but she was not disbarred. That is what honestly pissed me off. And the fact that, you know, there's so much more of this that happens that is not highlighted anywhere because there's no documentary on it. But yet we see these people every day, and we're constantly telling them, no, we can't hire you, or no, we can't this or can't that. Now you wonder why we are where we are, right? So a lot of people are suffering, and they have been. Sorry, I think I missed somebody's question over here. Oh, what part of defund the police do you think is appropriate? So as far as defunding the police, again, that's a hashtag that started and it became a whole new movement. So what they're really talking about in that situation is that it's not that we don't want cops. That's not what they're saying. The cops just don't need a tank. That's what they're saying. So that's what it is. They don't have to walk around with the tank. You know, they don't need that. So that's the message behind defund the police. They still, you know, everybody understands there's a purpose and a need for law enforcement, just not like that. And they should take that money instead and reinvest it back into the community. So that you have some places who have already started to create, you know, these community-based approaches to dealing with people first before law enforcement is called into the scene. I think they've started something like that here in Macon County. I'm not 100% sure. And I do know that it's something that needs to happen in a lot more places, but it's just, and in Chicago, in the latest citywide meeting that I was in there, they're discussing it there too. Like, how do they really do this? Who's going to have that kind of commitment? That's really what they're looking for, because it's going to be volunteers that are going to have to do it, because nobody has the amount of funding figured out yet, right? So it's going to be something like that. And okay, is there a tendency to look at these stories? Yeah. So what changes are we advocating for? So our latest, we meet, we have legislative calls every Wednesday or every Friday, depends on, you know, how busy the week is. And one of the most recent changes that we're working on for juvenile justice is the age in which you can actually have a kid sentenced to detention or even have them held in detention. It is 13 years old right now, and we have pushed, we're being strategic about this, but so we're pushing for older and older and older. So I think we're at 14 right now. So we're going to be looking at 15, looking at 16, you know, and seeing really what makes sense. You don't just move a number because it feels right. You know, you have to have some evidence to support what it is that you're trying to do in terms of public policy. Detention is the same thing as jail, which is where young people are held until it's time for them to have a hearing, or this is where the judge will sentence them 30, 60, 90 days, 2 years, whatever. But juvenile court is indeterminate sentencing. So that is like, if somebody, what that means is if somebody is sentenced to adult prison for 1 to 3 years, well, that's 1 to 3 years. But in juvenile court, you could sentence somebody for the same type of crime that normally they would go to prison for 1 to 3 years if they were an adult. But basically what happens is it's indeterminate sentencing. So the prisoner review board is the one who determines when to let them out. They could be home in 2 weeks. And then the interpretation of that is, oh, so the courts didn't do anything to the kids? They didn't cut their fingers off? They didn't chop their arms off, right? So there's all kinds of things about, you know, and lots of things to discuss in that regard too, and that it's not perfect, but we do meet every week. We look at restorative justice policies. We look at how we go about incorporating those, which is actually, again, one of the things my dissertation is talking about. I basically took an example of a teen court and showed the evolution of a teen court, and basically what it all looks like, what it means, right? Can't release too many details yet. And then the other thing that we talk about in these legislative meetings are, you know, just about detentions in particular. Are we wasting money, you know, on some of these efforts? Are we actually finding ways to improve the system? Have we helped anything? You know, so there's actual review of these kinds of things, which is where the Inspector General's office, that's why they did the report on the HICF program and found out it wasn't helping anything. It was hurting. These kids who were, probably some of them were low risk, they were still being, you know, handcuffed to a rail, for crying out loud. Why are we doing this? Is 2020. You know, why are we doing this? And I'm not saying that all kids are absolute saints. That is not what I'm saying. So please don't interpret it that way. What I'm saying is that there's a more humane way to treat people. And we have not been doing that in the criminal justice system. It was never set up to do that, actually. And so it's just kind of how it is. So, and we have to change that, because I don't like how it is, and I'm sure you don't either. 42 million was not enough. And as you heard Antron say, I think he said that, yeah, because his mother passed away. He said, you know, you can get all the money in the world, but it didn't save my mom. I had nothing left. 42 million meant nothing to him. And they had to split it 5 ways anyway. Let's see. So what are people doing in Illinois to help? So there are a couple of reentry initiatives. However, a lot of them are siloed. So I don't know if they're working together. Maybe they are. But there are a couple of different reentry possibilities even here in Macon County. There are some folks already working on it. And I do know that, you know, they will be having future conversations about expanding reentry, because it needs to happen. Reentry comes in many different ways, shapes, and forms. We're talking about reentry from prison, reentry from detention. There's even reentry from school suspension, like all that kind of stuff, you know. And so it is basically a conversation that is very timely for what it's worth, as a lot of people are being released, right, from prison and jail because of COVID-19, but there was no reentry in place for them, for a lot of them, right? So there's going to be some interesting turn of events happening soon. So what kind of psychological testing is done for a child? Depends on the type of program that you have, but they do have biopsychosocial tests that are done, which is where you can determine, you know, the young person's risks, the needs. They do different assessments. So that's looking at risks, needs, also looking at, you know, their responsivity to treatment. And then also too, looking at the mental health of the young person. And then they have to somehow find a way to have programming designed around those things, which we found out, especially in the GIST program, doesn't always happen. And anybody that's not focusing on those things, there are a couple of, you know, statewide initiatives that are going to be reviewing and recommending to shut things down, just like they did with the GIST. Okay. So did legislation change when you can try a kid as an adult? Yes, it did. It changed a couple of years ago, actually. Now everybody has to go to juvenile court to be reviewed, unless it's like murder. I think that's the only one that didn't change. But the point is to try to have juvenile court to review those cases first before they're actually sent directly to adult court. So yeah, the transfers to adult court, that language is still changing. It's not over. It's still something that the Juvenile Justice Initiative focuses on. We have a long way to go. Because just because we see the point doesn't mean prosecutors see the point, doesn't mean that a lot of people in the community see the point. You see what I mean? So it takes time to change a policy. It takes a lot of time. Okay, is there a way to get a call to action to support these efforts? Absolutely. There are different coalitions and different councils that you can join. In fact, we have a couple here in Macon County. There's a Juvenile Justice Council. We also have the Coalition for End Money Bond is actually still a thing, right? And we also have the Family Violence Coordinating Council, because a lot of the kids, you know, they do experience family violence, and you don't find that out until later, right? So yeah, there's lots of things that we can do here. There's also going to be a couple of new initiatives throughout 2021 that are going to happen here in Macon County in particular. So we are doing all the fundraising for those things now. Then we'll do the release of, you know, that information for when we have those new projects up and going here locally. The school to prison pipeline is a new concept. And have you had any experience with this research? Absolutely. In fact, when Bruce Rauner was still in office, one of the things that he did is he abolished the zero tolerance policies. Anybody familiar with that process and what happened there? Kind of where your PBIS and all that stuff came from in the schools. Yeah. So PBIS and this holy matrimony of restorative justice, although a lot of people didn't really know what restorative justice was. Yeah, the school to prison pipeline, there was a presentation done by Dr. Monique Morris. And she basically talked about criminalizing young Black girls in schools. And she did this comparison, blew my mind. I got the book. You can get it on Amazon. It's great. But anyway, she did this comparison of Black kids to their white counterparts in schools and the zero tolerance policies that affected the kids. And she also did sort of the side-by-side of how teachers or administration in schools would typically approach a situation given the demographics of the kid. And then she coupled that along with different barriers that kids tend to experience, whether it's at home, whether it's in the statewide system, like somebody might be, you know, receiving government assistance while others have a pretty wealthy family, you know, those kind of things. But yeah, let me type that in. The name of that book is, it's Dr. And it's called, gosh, I'm gonna look that up. What did I just say? Push Out. There, thank you. There it is. Push Out. That's it. And so the thing is, what I really learned about that book, and Illinois followed suit right after. It was like September 2017 or 2018 when the zero tolerance policies were abolished in Illinois. And that is sad that I have the month memorized. But anyway, I was so happy to see it happen. And that this is something that really the schools needed to have, because they began to rely a lot on their zero tolerance policies, which affected the kids that were, you know, in all walks of life, but really it affected the kids who got in trouble the most. So your Black and your brown kids. And that was one of the main feeds into the school to prison pipeline, because the more kids got in trouble in school, the more likely they were to get in trouble elsewhere, because all eyes were already on them. Make sense? Okay, I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking, so I'm going to open the floor. Does anybody have any questions or comments that you want to throw out there? Again, I'm used to 4-hour classes. We can do this all day, you know, so let me know. Any questions, comments?
I think it was easy to want to be really mad at Linda or Elizabeth, you know, the team that put these boys into jail and set this in motion, but it really is a system. I mean, you start thinking about the larger, all the players in this. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, just to focus in, is the prison guards. And I'm curious if there's any reform that's occurring around training for prison guards, any kind of ways of helping them to understand trauma. I don't know if you're familiar with ACEs, just, they're probably traumatized too, I'm guessing, maybe as prison guards. And I thought about that poor nurse that was treating Corey when he first went in, and she looked frightened to do anything different than to just, you know, do her job, because the prison guard was staring at her. And it just made me wonder if there are things happening around reform, around training that you're aware of.
And one of the things that I'm actually very proud of the Illinois Department of Corrections for doing is, when you hire the right people, you have a chance to get something done. They hired Heidi Miller, and Heidi is a huge reformist, talking about criminal justice, and even how, they do have to examine what's going on with the whole entire system. So that means not only the people in the system, but the people who are working the system. And they do focus on those things, and they have lots of training that happens. The IDOC did a presentation last year at our statewide conference for Adult Redeploy Illinois, and they were talking about even focusing on things that they just had never done before, which we're sitting in the audience like, whoa, this is our DOC talking like this? Like, what? So like, we were actually really proud to hear them saying all the changes that they were proposing to make based on the trainings, based on the fact that, you know, trauma informed is a conversation, but it's actually, it's a great tool to open the door to even us understanding our own trauma. And yet we're supposed to work with kids. We're supposed to work with sexual abuse victims. We're supposed to work with teachers, right? Like, there's a whole lot that we're supposed to do. So yes, there are reform changes going on and training that's happening. And so there's a whole lot more that we need to do, though. We're not done. We're not done. We cannot be comfortable with where we are. We're not done.
Can I touch base on what you just mentioned too? I work for Heritage Behavioral Health Center. So a lot of what the DOC is doing, we are involved in giving them some ideas on trainings and stuff like that, so we work together a lot of times so we can effectively help people in those trauma-based situations, and in the whole reform as well, because we have experience, working with clients who have been in those situations, and then they come to us and they're like, hey, give us some tips on how to deal with this. We're going to send this call over to you. Can you talk to this person? So we work a lot of times head on with them.
And you just said something that's very critical as well. If Heritage and Crossing, if you guys weren't doing what you do in terms of training and building up your staff, IDOC would have no one to communicate about with, these types of things in those situations. So honestly, everybody has had to step up their game, especially now with this COVID stuff that's about to happen. And those of you that might be aware of this, but even, at the end of the month here, a lot of people are going to lose out on, or maybe you're not aware, but a lot of people are going to lose out on these, the governor's, he extended an order to make sure people weren't going to actually, be evicted from their homes and things, for back payment, back rent and stuff. Well, that expires soon. And so I think it's either at the end of this month or it's, I think, through August 15th or something like that. But 28 million people stand to be impacted by this. So what do we think we're going to look at here pretty soon? Right?
Yeah.
I have a question about the reforms in our Illinois justice system. I was aware, and I work with legislators. I'm a lobbyist for Planned Parenthood, and I've had discussions over the last year or more with several of them related to reforms for incarcerated women and the treatment of women in our system. And my understanding was that as recent as last fall, there were some really disturbing things happening at Logan for the treatment of female prisoners. And I'm curious if you know if there have been any developments on that, or if there are going to be developments, because I know units like, Orange Crush came in. It was highly traumatizing. They've had lockdowns confining women to cells. And some of the senators went and met with people at Logan who actually told personal stories, and including some of the guards, some of the female guards who were upset about what they were seeing. So I was just curious if you knew anything about that.
Unfortunately, I don't know anything about that. It's new to me. And it's unfortunate that these things are happening, because I'm sure it's not just Logan. Oh yeah, no, it's, yeah. You know what I mean? So yeah, let the conversations begin. They have to happen. Yeah.
And I think we're still conditioned to think of men differently, and we shouldn't. But in particular with women, they have a very high rate, the women who are incarcerated have a very high rate of having experienced domestic and sexual violence, having experienced drug use disorder, mental health issues. I mean, it is, compared to our general population, is just through the roof. And the really punitive measures that are taken do not help them. And in many ways, it's very similar to what we see with juveniles too. They're experiencing a lot of the things that they're involved with are because of different things related to that. I think we have a harder time with adult men seeing that stuff, particularly and this may get back to the whole thing about animals and monsters, but particularly about how men of color are viewed. But I think that there definitely is a lot to be done around issues of mental health, substance use, violence, trauma, all of those kinds of things. And it would probably be cheaper for us to deal with that stuff than what we're doing now. I did have one thing that I wanted to raise with you, and that was the issue of how or if there is any good way to approach folks who do re-enter, and if there are any really good models about how you can do that, because it seems to me, and I put in the chat, I was actually quite amazed to see how well these 5 men ended up doing, that only one of them ended up, you know, getting involved in criminal activity in order to make a living, that they somehow, you know, they got, while they were incarcerated, they got their degrees, they got out, they somehow found jobs, they formed families, they've had children, they've done their best despite all the trauma that they've experienced. And they pretty much did that all before they got their settlement. So what can we do, or are there good models that are being done to help with this?
Yeah, good questions. So the first thing I'll say about models in particular, the models are going to depend on where you are. Depends on, you know, first of all, how large is your reentry population going to be? And then also too, you know, how much commitment do you truly have from people in your area, people in your city? It does us no good to say that we want to work with them if we're afraid of them. You know, like they're not animals, they're not monsters. They committed crimes. Some people, you know, and if the ones who have committed heinous crimes, that's not who you're going to be working with. Chances are they're not coming home tomorrow. So in particular, we have to have people who are truly committed to this kind of work. And even when people who do serve their time, when they're getting out, they need to be welcomed like humans. And I think that oftentimes that is something that we forget, is that we are all human. We forget it. We might feel a certain type of way today and then we forget it tomorrow, you know? And so it's just, that's honestly like my personal approach with everybody, is I don't care what walk of life you're coming from. I don't care what crime you've committed. Can we be present in this meeting today? Both of us, right? All of us. And can we honestly find ways to work with each other? I'm going to listen as I understand someone else's truth, or at least try to see things through the way they do. Because chances are they can't see things through the normal lens that we try to force them to see through. They can't see it right now. They have so many other things going on, right? So in terms of the efforts to, you know, create something, I was actually hoping to pose that to this group. If that is indeed something that you would like to be a part of, please let me know. And there are different, you know, there are different agencies here in the community that do work on reentry projects. But they again, there's still a lot of work to be done. So if it is something you'd like to do, we can make that an agenda item for our councils, you know, for different committees that we can create, and we can start it if it doesn't exist here. That is something we can do. It's great to have discussions, but there's always the moment. And if you're ever in a meeting with me, you already know I'm going to challenge you with this. But, you know, what are we going to do next about it? And how much time do we have? Right? So do any of you know of any legislation being raised to allow those who have left prison to vote? In Illinois, they can vote anyway. Yeah, if you can vote with a felony. Should we get involved with the Black Lives Matter group? Well, let me fill you in a little bit with BLM. So Black Lives Matter, the message behind that is just that, you know, it's not about just saying only Black Lives Matter, right? BLM is actually the message is that all lives cannot matter until they all do. They're saying Black Lives Matter too. That's really what they're saying. And as soon as you hear, you know, a lot about somebody saying that all lives matter or something like that, it dilutes the whole purpose of having that message. And honestly, it can feel like a slap in the face to some people who are just trying to say, hey, me too, I matter as well. So as far as, you know, Black Lives Matter, the movements are different no matter what city you're going to. I mean, heck, even just 2 weeks ago, we were, you know, on the phone with Italy. I had no idea that they were going nuts over there. You know, I had no clue. And again, having formed this group, it blew my mind. It just how the world is responding to this, you know, like all lives do matter, absolutely, but they can't matter until Black Lives Matter too, you know. So there are definitely things you can do from right where you are, and it's just a matter of you know, getting involved with your, again, these task force that are being created. You get involved with like creating community-wide groups, support groups for people that are honestly disenfranchised and feeling all of these different kinds of barriers, right? It doesn't mean that you give them half of your paycheck every 2 weeks. That's not what that means. What it means is that you be a support for them and that you help them to understand what their rights are. You help to understand too, you know, what it is that they're actually, what they're experiencing. And I'll give you a symbolism here that was brought up actually in another meeting too, earlier today. But again, we see smoke right now, burning buildings. We see it right now. And the thing about the smoke and burning buildings is there's no justice, there's no peace. This stuff gonna keep burning until somebody hears us, right? That's what they're saying. So the thing is, there's been a lot of, okay, gotcha. There's been a lot of movement so far, but yet people are still sort of in this moment where we're trying to figure out, what does reform look like for BLM? How do we do that? Does it cost us anything? How much time are we committing, right? Those are all questions going through everybody's heads. It's not just us, but also too, where do we get started? This is a very deeply rooted systemic problem that did not just start yesterday. So where do we start? And so again, I encourage each of you, if it is something that you do want to be involved with, get involved with the councils, with the committees. Do exactly what you're doing now. You're having these discussions, and then you're reaching out to your guest speakers to see, you know, what ideas they have. And then you can choose how involved you want to be in terms of your time commitment, in terms of, you know, what comes next. So I think we have a question too. So an additional policy issue is that incarcerated people cannot receive, that's right, Pell Grants from higher education. They sure cannot. At least I think that's still the case. Yes. There's a documentary, College Behind Bars. Yep. That's right. They cannot receive scholarships. They cannot receive, you know, housing. They can't, it's a whole lot of that, right? Again, the way the system was set up is that when these kinds of barriers exist, you're not ever supposed to get away from them. There's always got to be this mechanism of control. That is the way the system has always been set up. And so when these things begin to bother us, yes, we're the ones who, you guys are the ones who drive policy. It's you. You speak to your legislators. Your legislators make the laws, and then they have to actually create them for the managers to carry out. The managers then hire their people in the front lines to do it. And the people in the front lines are working directly with the public, who feeds that information back to you. It's a whole entire cycle. You are the real policymakers. If you don't like something, you change it, right? You get involved with these task forces. You get involved with these councils. Make sure your voice is heard and that it is clear. This is the same thing I would tell my students too. That's crime and public policy, by the way, good class. So, but yes, the new attorney approached the old prosecutor and she said, yeah, that they were guilty even though they had a confession. Okay, yeah.
She was asking about why no one involved was prosecuted for coercion. And that somebody said it was easy to hate that prosecutor, but I still didn't like her. I'm very optimistic about people in general, but when they go to her at that lunch and they tell her, we have a confession from someone else and she wrote 4 books and made multi-million dollars and was like, they're guilty, I still wanted to punch her in the face, which I know is not right, but
I wanted to know too, out of the 4 books that she wrote, did she write about the exonerated 5 in one of those books? Is that what they were about?
It sounded like most of them.
Yeah. It sounded like that's, I didn't search her books or anything personally. I didn't, because I'm sure I would have tried to burn them too. But no, I didn't search her books, but she did with I think they said they were crime novels. So, you know, she probably used some kind of information about those cases, but that question, I'm gonna actually flip the script here because it's such a great teachable moment. I love it. But you said that you felt like she still should have had something to happen to her. I talked about disbarring her. That sometimes is not enough either for how people truly feel, right? If she were to have been arrested or, you know, something like that to have happened because of the part that she played in the coercion, should the police who are actually killing people, doing their jobs, should they too be arrested?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, we don't have to actually go, you know, like, I love those types of questions because it forces us to have, whenever we're talking about policy changes, this is what I teach in the classroom as well, but we need to have a full 360 view, not just a 180. You know, we need a full 360 view of what this actually means as we begin to approach any kind of conversation about policy change. Who's affected? Who's impacted? And what would it look like? And I'm just going to toss this question out to you. What would it look like if there was some kind of a law that was written that said, if officers were to kill anyone that is unarmed or, you know, what have you, that, you know, they should be fired and also prosecuted automatically?
Isn't there a law that kind of allows that not to happen? I was listening to Code Switch the other day, and they were talking about, and I can't remember the name that they used, but it was basically that if you are a police officer, there has to be precedent in the courts for you to be prosecuted. But the problem is that those cases will never get to that point. So there's no statutes or previous case law that will ever allow that to happen. So in most cases, it won't happen.
Mm-hmm. Good point. How fascinating is that, right? Again, these things will continue to happen until we, as the public, say what it is that we want to change, because you are the ones who make the laws. That's exactly where we are. Qualified immunity, I think a lot of people would agree with you. Mm-hmm. Right? Yes. So, I mean, and again, I could go all day about this stuff. I love these conversations, and I love how thought-provoking they can be. And I also love how involved we can be as a group of people to decide what we want to see next. Where do we go from here? It's great to get together and feel good, but what do we do next, right? You are the ones with the power to do that. And you are also the very ones to describe what it was like for you, from your individual perspective, what it was like for you when you watched, you know, what happened to these young men. Because truth be told, they're not the only ones. Mm-hmm. This happens every day. You know, the way we see it now, just because, again, the world is digital now, right? Everything is recorded. We're seeing it on TV and in social media as what's happening on the street with law enforcement and unarmed people. Doesn't mean that they're not guilty people. They hadn't committed a crime. Some of them were innocent completely. But what we're looking at is the fact that it was the interaction between the police and those members of the community. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's about looking at everything, the whole thing, the whole 360. Right? Any other thoughts or questions? Did I hit most of the questions over here? I was trying to follow them as they were coming in. Did I miss any?
If we could we go back to the prosecutor? Mm-hmm. I was so angry watching when she was, you know, wanting them to round up 40 kids to question them. She just knew it was one of those kids. And I worked with I usually teach high school English, and I've taught in places where I was the only white person. Mm-hmm. You know, so I was so angry to see that attitude about her. Mm-hmm. And when I taught in Chicago for 4 years, and at the time, one of the students that I had got in trouble. They came and handcuffed him and everything. And the dean at the time, after the kid left the office, he was handcuffed and taken out of the school. And the dean's response was, her husband was a police officer, and I'm not anti-cop, but I'm upset when things are not justified. But she said to me, well, they won't have enough on him to fully keep him overnight, but don't worry, he'll get his, because my husband told me that whenever they have a kid and they can't prove something on him, they drop him off in the rival gang's neighborhood in order to have him get punished anyway.
That's horrible.
Yeah, and she referred to, I remember her saying very clearly with her blonde hair and blue eyes, I remember her saying, they're animals. She said it just like, so when that prosecutor said that, I was like, oh my gosh, the perpetuated crap, you know? And in 1989, I was in high school. And I vaguely remember something about that case, but I was, you know, not remotely watching the news. Yeah. You know, it was all about Madonna back then, but no, but I just, that really struck me. I think she should be doing time.
I mean, you have a very interesting perspective. You really do. And I even, you know, go back to what, you know, Hillary Clinton said, who was secretary, you know, to call people who look like me, to call us super predators.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I didn't understand that back then. I do now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, it hurt. Because I mean, I'm like, shoot, I almost voted for this woman. You know what I mean? Like, you know, actually I did vote for her. I'll be honest,
Yeah.
I did. And it's like she issued the apology, and I'm just like, it still didn't really mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's kind of, I don't know. It's not, I don't think it's anything that we're obviously going to be able to figure out tonight, but it's just that it hurts when people dehumanize you, even in just words. You know what I mean? I've never met her. She's never met me. But, and this comment was made, you know, when I was very small, but still she was talking about people who look like me. And honestly, that's what hurts. I talked to a lot of people all over the world, and I have a friend in India, and I asked her a question, and I asked her, I said, how does the world view African-American people in India? She said, and she was honest. In fact, we were roommates in college too. She said, honestly, Black people are viewed like you're loud, obnoxious, you get angry at the drop of a dime, and no one can reason with you. I said, really? And then I thought about it as I went to a different conference talking about Black women. And what was actually in that conference was, you know, talking about empowering Black women. And one of the things that she talked about was how we're portrayed in the media. That's all the world sees of us. And those are the ones they pay millions of dollars to. And don't get me wrong, I love Nene Leakes, but this is what I'm talking about. The housewives and all that stuff. This is the image the world sees of us.
Right.
You know? And so it is reinforced constantly.
You know, I was a high school teacher from 1979 until 1997. And I told my, some of my young girls, I said, and we were very good friends, and I had been teaching them for a long time, and I was their music teacher. So we always, you know, just threw stuff back and forth at each other. I said, you girls, I said, you are just so loud. And one of them said, well, Shields, here's the deal. For so long, we have not been able to talk. You know, we've been in situations where we've been told to be quiet, that we shouldn't be looking in people's eyes, that we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that. And no one has heard us. And so that's why we're loud. And so there. And I said,
I told you.
Well, okay. I get it, you know, I get it. So it was funny that my students and I had that discussion.
But you know, it's interesting though, and you bring up a very good point, and that's kind of the beauty about restorative justice, is that we as adults, we're stuck in our ways, are we not? Like we all are. But the thing is, we really don't listen to one another, and we really don't listen to the kids either, especially if it's inconvenient for us. So the truth of the matter is, and what we learn in RJ, especially when we do a lot of our trainings, we have permission to listen to people whenever we are sitting in restorative justice trainings. We have permission to listen to people whenever we are in an actual setting, you know, with a restorative circle, you know, those kinds of things. And we learn, even from some of the trainings that I do, the very first day of training, we learn how well we don't listen to each other. It's a lot of fun. But it also really, again, it breaks the ice into deeper conversation, but we don't listen that well. We just don't. So, let's see, there's a comment. We cannot forget the climate of crime. Yeah, this was horrific, brutal crime. The cops and prosecutors were under a lot of pressure. That's right. It was a high profile case, and that's the time for everybody to get their name out there, you know, to feel like they're doing something at their job. Yeah, they didn't want the public to feel like, like they just let people go. I'm gonna talk about this, and again, just tell you how this works. There was an attorney, I was an intern at the state's attorney's office here, and there was an attorney who's no longer here. He left years ago, but one of the things he used to do all the time, and I remember him walking down the hall, and this is maybe my second or third week of work. I remember him walking down the hall where he would say things like, we bring the X, we bring the X. I didn't know what he meant then, but he was talking about, we bring the class X felonies, because the class X felonies is the highest level of felony next to murder, right? So that he was taking pride in, we bring the X. And he even talked about how, you know, in some situations that, you know, they were able to, just like the attorney that you saw, they were able to piece things together. And even when you guys go to a jury trial, it's a play on words, it's semantics, you know, in a lot of situations. And the defense, all they have to do, they're not proving someone's innocence. What they have to do is prove whether or not their client was there or not. You know what I mean? That's what they're doing. They just have to cast a small percentage of reasonable doubt. That's all they have to do. Prosecution has the burden of proof. And so in this situation, whenever, you know, there's, like, again, with the exonerated 5, even though there was no way to connect the boys to the DNA, right? It wasn't even their DNA. They were still convicted because it was a play on words. And you take a bunch of people, you put them in a room who probably have no legal experience, and then they're the jury, and they're the ones who decide what's going to happen. It's like watching a movie for them in some situations, right? Some are actually, you know, pretty savvy in that they know exactly what's going on, and they're going to be the ones to be more, you know, to be more outspoken in a jury room. Others, not so much. They want to get out of there. They have stuff to do. They don't want to miss the game, you know, all that kind of stuff. So the system has many flaws. I think you're going to say something, Heather.
Oh, I was just going to talk a little bit about restorative justice. It's something that I believe like 5-6 years ago, we started in Decatur Public Schools talking about, I worked with Melissa Tyus to learn about it, to practice it, to get kind of the background with her. And I've been using it I always have one class that I do it with. I teach middle school. And so I've been using it for the last 4 years. And it does make a difference. You talk about listening, and that's the whole point of a restorative justice circle, is just to listen and to actually hear what somebody has to say, learn how much alike we actually are, and to actually experience somebody else's feelings, their emotions, their anger. A couple of successes in my classroom that we've had, I had to be gone unexpectedly because my son was very ill, and I had a substitute that was not a great substitute, unfortunately, and it actually caused a lot of trauma in my classroom while I was gone. And rather than come back and yell at the kids, we held a circle. I said, we got to talk about this. We got to talk about what went down. And so I pulled my classes and we had circles, and I said, tell me what happened. Tell me how you felt. Tell me how we can make this better. And I had parents contact me after that and say, my kids didn't know what to do because nobody ever wants to hear what they have to say. And it's so powerful. And it changes the culture in that room. It changes how the kids interact. We've had bullying issues. And I've said, whatever I have planned is done. We have to talk about this. And you'll have the boys that are the hardest boys crying because they'll say, I'm hurting you because I've been hurt, or somebody's hurting me. And it's so powerful to just hear their truth. And I'm doing it in a class in one building, but to think about what a difference it could make if we all heard each other's truths.
Exactly.
It would change the world.
Exactly. And I'll be honest with you, in my own selfish way, we weren't doing enough in the States. So that's why I went global. And I had to. We were it was snail mail here, you know, it just wasn't happening fast enough. So you bring up a very, very good point though, Heather. And so, you know, the running joke with circles is that if somebody cries in a circle, then it's a successful circle. I don't think I've had a single circle where somebody hasn't cried. And it's usually the men who cry first. The grown men with, you know, the tats and the muscles, it's them. Because they have to, and what they say is that they have to put on a facade for so long, you know. It's okay for men to cry too, but not in front of other guys. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's the whole thing. So the truth of the matter is, you know, it's just a matter of being vulnerable. That's one of the things in restorative justice that we talk about in trainings. It's okay to be vulnerable when you're around people that you've built and established this community with, you know. Not with random folks. It doesn't work like that. It cannot be with random people. It's weird. It's awkward. But when you establish a community, you know, with people that you're working with, that's when everything changes. And that's what you do in the classroom setting. These kids are together every day, you know, and they're used to seeing each other. And somebody else a new kid comes into the room. Now you got to introduce them to the circle because now they're a stranger, you know, like that kind of thing. So it is definitely, thank you, Leslie. Yes, I agree. It's definitely something that we should do more of. And so that's the reason why there's going to be a new restorative justice project here in 2021. Restorative justice is already happening here, but this is going to be on a very large scale in 2021. So keep your eyes open for that. We're going to do huge publicity about it, but we are going to need help with this. We cannot do it alone. Yes, me too. We can't do it alone. So we're going to be reaching out. We need volunteers. Some of these things do turn into paid positions otherwise, but you know, we do need volunteers to get things up and going. And even with, yes, with COVID-19, thank goodness for Zoom, you know what I mean? Because you can still do circles with Zoom. Yes, it is here in Decatur. And it's going to be for all of Macon County, but yes, here in Decatur. And so we're working on the funding now, we're working on the place, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so it's going to be large scale, which I've been waiting for years. This is truly a dream come true for me to see this. And again, we're going to need as much help as we can get from people in the community. And we want to actually, you know, open the doors for people. So here's an example of what we do with teen justice. With teen justice, kids do not have to be arrested before they come to us. People can refer them to our program. And our people are back now from furlough. That was weird, but they're back now. So, but people, they can refer the kids to us. Yes, there will be teacher training as well. In fact, that's going to happen next month. And there's also, so when the kids are referred to us, they're coming directly from law enforcement. They're coming directly from you. They're coming directly from community-based agencies. The point is to have kids, you know, have the opportunity to come through diversion without having to experience any kind of law enforcement contact whatsoever. That's what we've been missing all along. So again, I completely changed and redesigned teen justice. I had to. I could not keep doing things the way we used to. Teen court came from 2004. That model had not changed since then. And again, learning about the history and context, I could not do it. I just couldn't. I tried, and then I didn't like it. Having faith in our justice system, I'll let you know when I find it, because I don't right now. I'm just going to be honest. I don't have faith in the justice system. I just don't. Learning everything that I've learned, it's just, and even again, the learning process is still going on, you know. I don't think there's ever going to be an end to it in sight anywhere near, like anywhere soon. But learning that there are so many fixes that need to happen. I don't have faith in the justice system right now. That's just my own personal 2 cents. You know, maybe somebody feels differently. I do think that there are some good aspects of the justice system when done correctly, but I know that there are some underlying things that need to be changed.
I have a question about the restorative justice. You said you need volunteers. Like what kind of positions or what do you need help with?
Let me ask you that. I'm going to ask the whole group this question. And if you can do me a favor and type yes in the chat box, this will kind of give me a good assessment of how you feel. So to answer your question, Angie, if I ask someone to be on a circle for a kid that has just gotten in trouble, would you be willing to do it?
Absolutely. Oh, sorry. Me too.
Here we go. There's the waterfall. I love that. We call that waterfall, where you can see if someone is interested in being a part of a circle. So the thing about a circle, especially let's say there's a kid who is caught at Walmart for stealing something. All we know is that the kid is just caught for stealing something. We don't know why. We don't know if somebody put him or her up to it. We don't know. We don't know if they really needed this stuff because they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. There are so many layers that have to be uncovered. But the criminal justice system was only used to the arrest and the after effect, like the charge. That's what we had, right? So we don't know if this young person has mental health issues that have not been addressed. We don't even know if there's ever been an assessment done, right? So that's where we have to start to think differently about how we work with human beings, because that's who they are. And so are we. And we have to take care of ourselves too. So the cool thing about a circle is that it's therapeutic for all parties involved. Those of you that have been in a circle, oh yeah, you know what I mean. Bring your whole tissue. In fact, because we do a lot of circles in Zoom right now, I have tissue nearby because I know I'm gonna need it. Like, I don't know, can you see it? There you go. This was a big, huge fat roll. It's diminished a little bit, but I have tissue nearby because I know what that means, you know. And when these circles happen every week, I know who's coming. I'm like, yep, we're about to do this. So again, seeing this waterfall of yeses, I'm gonna put my information into the chat box, and please, 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 if you are definitely, you know, really serious about doing this, I will put you on our email list for a lot of things that we have that's going to be going on here pretty soon. I know in 2 days, actually, on Wednesday, we have a Family Violence Coordinating Council meeting. You're welcome to attend if you'd like. And so for this particular meeting, and I'm going to work on sending out the save the date flyer and everything now. Is the screen share enabled? I actually would like to show the flyer for this. See if I can pull that up really quickly. And then I'm going to show the speaker bios as well. So thank you. So here is the save the date for the Family Violence Coordinating Council. And this email is going to go out tonight after this call is over. But it's going to be from 12 p.m. to 1. And what we're going to end up doing is talking about, first of all, we're just now coming back from, you know, COVID being a thing, right? So figuring out what we plan to do for the year. Our new grant started July 1st, and we have until June 30 to get a couple of things accomplished. So this one in particular is focusing on teen dating violence, family violence, you know, the kid to parent or the parent to kid type of violence, kids to grandparents type of violence, you know, aunts, uncles, extended family violence, right? It's also going to be talking about violence against elderly victims, our seniors. It's going to be, we focus on violence against people with disabilities. We focus on all kinds of things like that. You are welcome to attend this meeting. And if you would really like to, yeah, sure. If you would really like to, you know, participate, again, I'll put my email and everything in here. Send me an email and I'll send you the link for the invite. Here we go. Hold on. Actually, that didn't go to everybody. Here we go. Okay. And so if you would like to come, please send me an email, let me know. I know a lot of the agencies that we work with here, they're all on that mailing list and they've confirmed that they will be there as well. So this meeting is actually for the whole 6th Circuit, but there's mostly Macon and Piatt counties that are in DeWitt, I think too, that are going to be in this meeting on Wednesday. And so again, if you're interested, please send me an email. I will add you to that list. And I want to show you who 2 of the speakers are going to be. So I'll screen share that as well. And what we're doing in this case, just to kind of show you, let me bring this up. Isn't it nice to be able to screen share? It's great. This is, we're going to be talking about family group conferencing training for this particular year. Anyone is welcome to attend. It is free. It's already paid for, so it is completely free. And Penelope Penny is actually what we call her, but she is from, she's really from the Caribbean, but she has done training in Toronto, Rome, Amsterdam, you know, all these other places. And she currently resides in Washington, D.C. And this is Lauren Walker. And Lauren and I, we've published together actually on a couple of different things. And you can see she's published over 50 articles on this kind of stuff, but she is a restorative lawyer, which means she works with law enforcement. She works with the lawyers. She works with the judges because they're the people who are used to the way the system has always been. And so she works and spends a lot of her time trying to find ways to, you know, to teach them how to see things differently. So being a part of a circle is so huge for them. And you can see that she has done hundreds of things with CNN and Oprah Winfrey Network. I mean, she's done all of these things. She's a really good friend of mine. And she's aware of this next big project that we're coming up with here in Decatur, and she and Penny have actually both agreed to help with these things, mainly because there's a lot of work that has to be done. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. And so with these two individuals being willing to help us with family group conferencing, this is going to be the start of a whole new type of paradigm shift here, in that we need to figure out how to get our victims to feel supported. Not that, you know, there are agencies here that are not already doing it, because they are, but how do we, you know, create some kind of conversation to bring these families back together, right, in a restorative way? Because I think, and maybe many of you will agree with me when I say this, but our systems have failed us time and time again. So we need to think outside the box about how to do this. And the agencies that work with families, they need to feel supported, right? They need to, and I don't mean just with funding. They need to feel supported, that there are going to be people in the community that have their back, right? Same thing. The people who are in the trenches working with those who have been hurt and harmed, they need assistance too. So having as much training available for the staff members who are working with folks, that's what this council is going to be focusing on. It is critical. Okay. So I think, Julie, is it okay if I do this? I wanted to show a bit and piece from my CV on here. Is that okay? Okay. Okay. Thank you. So I want to pull this up just so that you can actually see a lot of the work that's being done as well, in terms of, where'd my little window go? Here we go. Okay. I'm almost done. I promise I won't turn this into a 4-hour thing. I promise. Okay, but I want to at least show you this, right? So in terms of developing curriculum, just so that everybody is aware, the curriculum that's being developed at Millikan incorporates restorative justice, criminal justice, public policy, public administration. This is what the students are learning. So the strategy is to get them used to these paradigm shifts that are happening as well, so that when they get ready to graduate, which is why many of them get jobs right away, they're able to go right into the field and they're already used to this kind of work. The other thing that I want to do is actually, it's long, so I'm just going to scroll down past a lot of these jobs. I'm going to scroll all the way down to, let me keep going. Okay, here are the grants so far. Now, in the grants part, this one is one of the newest. However, there's going to be new grants that I haven't even put on here yet. There's going to be new grants that are going to be available. So again, this one focuses on domestic violence. This one focuses, well, this is the juvenile justice area in particular. And you can see these are not small amounts, right? So the thing is, these are system change type of grants. I don't go after money just for the sake of going after money because it's easy to do. I don't do that. I usually go after system change type of things. And the small ones would be, again, there's, you know, restorative family circles and things like that, truancy prevention. This is the kind of stuff that's happened before. I am looking for the one where we actually, there it is. This one from, what year is that? 2014 to 2015. This is the one where I wrote a grant to actually talk about a collaborative with the Macon County State's Attorney's Office and DPS 61 and Millikan. That's where the conversation started. And the other thing that's kind of happened, so again, these are all juvenile justice. The conversation has started here now for adult justice, and that we have this Adult Redeploy Illinois program. And we just, in June, last month, we just completed the statewide conversation. It's a statewide conference. All the ARI sites were there. And it was a virtual conference. And this is the particular, the grant that is going to open the door for adult restorative justice in Macon County. And we've a new partnership with Dove. We're working some new things out there as well, because just because somebody got arrested doesn't mean that they don't have other underlying issues, right? So we're focusing on a lot of these things. So the reason I'm showing you this is because, as you can see, we have have student employment grants too. So, you know, well, this is to expunge people's records. This is what the Millikan students were doing before COVID-19 threw it all off. But anyway, this is what they were doing. We created these new jobs for them. They were employees of government, right? And that one was just to get started.
That's cool.
So there's a lot of things that in terms of progression, I just want to show you where all this is going. And again, we need as much help as we can get. I'll be honest with you, I am not a person that has time for selfish egos. I just don't. There's too much work to be done. But what I do like to do is work with people who really have a heart for this community. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So if you are interested, thank you so much. And again, thank you for having me tonight as well. I hope that this was a good discussion for everyone involved. If you have questions, feel free to reach out at any time. I am always on one of these two cell phones, and so they always ring. I'm always checking email. And again, Julia, thank you for the invitation. Julia and Janelle, I think you're around. Yeah, there you are. Hi. So thank you for the invitation to come and talk about this. I was excited for this, and I could not wait to do this because it's not very often that an entire group of people will get together and say, we want to talk about this, right? Something that's so pressing and so, you know, relevant to what's going on today. So I applaud all of you as well for having these conversations and having these discussions.
Thank you, Kira, for joining us. This Zoom actually is going to be recorded and placed on the Community Foundation's website as well. So we actually have over 600 members in our group. A lot of people don't watch it live, so they'll be watching it later. I would really recommend anybody who has interest to get involved to contact Kira and, you know, follow her lead in really helping to figure out how we can throw community support behind these efforts. So thank you so much for everything you've shared. Continue to share with me and I'll share with the group.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Really. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
So everybody, we have just about 10 minutes left. I thought, you know, we could allow, I know, one of the reasons I felt like it was so important to invite Dr. Rogers to talk to us about, you know, some of these issues is that several of our conversations leading up to this have really brought us in this direction. You know, a lot of people were reaching out and saying, well, how can we help? You know, what is currently going on in our community. And so, you know, now we're at having watched When They See Us. Many of you also watched, you know, Oprah's special live with the actual individuals, the exonerated 5. How does this play into our previous conversations with Emmett Till and some of our previous texts as well? Was there any connections that you were starting to make, or in true light of Oprah fashion, aha moments, any of that happening for you? Just some threads that you're seeing?
Well, I'll speak for a minute. I mean, Julia's thrown us a bone and we're all like, I'm not going to go first, but I'll go first. I thought it was very respectful of the writer to include information about what it was like for the families of the boys and the mothers. Like, I remember a specific moment. One of the moms is sitting with her friend and they are watching, and who is now the president was on the news, and you know, the fact that he had taken out the ad in the newspaper to, you know, I thought that was, you know, no matter what your politics, I thought it was really cool that that mother was able to respond directly to that person in this movie. Like, her voice was heard, you know, because when you say something publicly, something hurtful, you don't always, you know, the people who you hurt don't always have a voice. And I thought that was really cool. It's like that moment, watching that, she was a voice for many, many parents and family members who have been hurt by their children the way that their children and their families were treated. Because when someone's arrested, the whole family's arrested. So, and I'm sorry, to tie it back to the Emmett Till story, it reminded me of his mother. Really did.
So Angie, that's a really interesting point about the media, and that was something that, you know, I had taken a couple of notes on and really thought through, you know, Emmett's mom making a very purposeful and concerted effort with the media. I cannot remember the name of which young man it was, but you know, when his mother comes to the precinct for him, one of the first things she says is, well, I'll just take this to the media, you know?
Right.
And so I'm really interested and intrigued what all you think about the power or the use of the media, you know, for some of these family members who feel a little powerless, and that kind of immediate turn. Yusef's mom, thank you, Heather. Yeah, Yusef's mom, in taking that information to the media, using that as a threat, and not even a threat, but leverage. Right? I mean, Emmett Till's mother made that conscious decision, and she didn't threaten. That was what she was going to do. Yusef's mom, very similarly, I think the media played a huge role in these young men's stories as well.
Yeah.
So one of the other themes that I kind of keep noticing and coming up, and even I see it in my own work and whatnot, is just, and kind of echo one of the messages from Dr. Rogers of, you know, there's just so much work to be done, and it's, you know, we don't even have to go back very far in our history to see where things have started, and it's just sometimes we kind of forget just how far we have to go. And I think the books we read and the conversations we've had brings that to light, when sometimes it's kind of easy to ignore that or forget about it or just not even know. But I kind of look at the view of the work that we have to do. It's not going to just take our generation. It's going to be generations from now before the work's done. But what are we doing now to get there? And I think that's what's so valuable about this conversation, is because we're starting to get there. But it's just a lot. And sometimes even this conversation can be so overwhelming to kind of keep it all in mind of, there's so many different aspects of things that we can work on. Where do we start? Or even like, what do we do? Or how can we even be successful when there's so much? And that's not to say that we can't, it's just kind of keeping it in perspective for how big this all is and how systematic and all that sort of thing.
I think that's one way that teachers can come in handy. I don't think we need to wait for a national holiday to address Black history. You know, I think I try to do it through my novels and discussing with the kids on how you need to treat people, no matter what color the skin is. It's heartbreaking when I might have a young lady come in with a scarf on and someone spending more time staring at her, you know? So for me as a teacher, I feel like I try to do it, maybe not on a daily basis, but just in what we're reading in our discussions and the things that I see on the news and what's happening around us. But, you know, as a parent too, I just try to talk to Riley, like George Floyd, when all that was going on. Riley, my daughter, came to me saying, "Mom, have you seen this on the news?" And so, you know, I was trying not to overwhelm her with with it, but then when she saw it, opened that door to communicate. So I think just offering yourself out as a human and doing your best to continually have those conversations on no matter where you work. It's like when we talked about Black Lives Matter. I was just talking to my husband the other day. We had a long ride to a baseball tournament, and we were just talking about it. And I said, you know, at first, when I heard all lives matter, I'm like, well, that makes sense. But then when I heard the other side of it on why it's not really appropriate, I'm like, that is right. You know what I mean? Like, I'm open and I love to hear all the different sides of the story so I can understand where everybody's coming from. And I think just having all the conversations is what's really important. And not just sitting back and letting someone continually on Facebook post something about all lives matter. That's just me.
Good. Any other last minute thoughts? Brandy says, to quote the Lorax, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. I think we all agree that it's been a very useful conversation tonight. I really feel like, you know, we're going places with our conversations. I feel like we're, you know, really moving in a positive direction and getting informed. I think we can all agree on that. I mean, I think there's not a person that can say that, you know, there's not new information coming about each time. Really excited to discuss Black Like Me. If you have never read that text before, it's a really powerful text. I know I've already had a couple of conversations with people who either read out of order or are reading quicker, which is wonderful, and they're excited for that conversation as well. I'll see what I can cook up for that conversation. But in the meantime, please continue to keep discussing. I'll definitely recommend for people to come back and watch this recording, as I think it's been extremely worthwhile, and just really appreciating the time and attention you guys continue to put in. Thank you so much for that. Otherwise, let's just keep the conversations going, and thank you for joining tonight. Appreciate it getting you out right at 8 o'clock. Have a good evening.